It wasn't the searing pain in my head or the doctor's grim face that told me my life had capsized. It was the text message from my wife, Ellie, waiting for me when I finally swam up from the morphine haze in a sterile hospital room, a screenshot of our joint savings account, balance $100, followed by, "This is the least I deserve for putting up with you all these years. Enjoy your recovery." I was Arthur Finch, 48 years old, and for the past 2 decades, head of archives at the city's largest public library, a quiet life dedicated to preserving other people's histories. Never imagining my own was about to be so violently shredded. The diagnosis had been a sudden severe stroke. One moment I was cataloging a collection of Civil War diaries, the next the world tilted, words dissolved, and then darkness. I'd spent 3 days unconscious, teetering on the edge. Now, awake but disoriented, my left side still stubbornly uncooperative, I stared at that message. 15 years of marriage, of shared Christmases and quiet evenings, reduced to a digital kick in the teeth. My emergency fund, our carefully hoarded down payment for a small cabin by the lake, even the money earmarked for my ailing mother's care, all vaporized. The betrayal was so audacious, so complete, it almost bypassed rage and went straight to a hollow, echoing numbness. My professional life was about an order, a meticulousness Ellie often teased as dusty. Now, that precision felt like a cruel joke in the face of such chaotic malice. My first instinct, drilled into me by years of handling fragile documents, was caution. No sudden moves. I typed back a single, ambiguous emoji, a thinking face. Nothing more. When the neurologist cleared me for discharge a day later, her voice laced with warnings about stress and the long road to recovery, she asked if someone was coming for me. "Yes, my wife." I lied, the words tasting like ash. Instead of going back to the home that was clearly no longer a sanctuary, I called my younger sister, Sarah. She was a history teacher, grounded and practical, the one person I knew I could count on without reservation. "Sarah, it's Arthur. I'm out of the hospital. Can I come to your place? And please, don't tell Ellie you've heard from me." There was a brief silence, then her calm, steady voice, "Arthur, what happened? Are you okay? Of course, come straight over." The relief was a physical wave. The first solid thing I'd felt since waking up to that venomous text. My sanctuary would be her spare room, a small, quiet space where I could begin to sift through the wreckage. Settling into Sarah's guest room, the initial shock began to recede, replaced by a cold, analytical dread. The stroke had muddled my thoughts, but the archivist in me, the part that lived by timelines and evidence, started to stir. Ellie's text wasn't an impulse, it was a coup planned and executed with brutal efficiency. And as the fog in my brain thinned, flickers of memory, like misfiled index cards, began to surface, warning signs I dismissed or misinterpreted. There was her sudden, intense interest in alternative investments. About 6 months ago, spurred on by a new friend, a supposed art consultant named Marcus Thorne. She'd met him at a gallery opening, she said. He was charming, articulate, and promised returns that seemed too good to be true, a red flag I'd noted but hadn't investigated, trusting Ellie's judgment, or perhaps too absorbed in my own world of crumbling manuscripts. Then there were the hushed phone calls, the way she'd angle her laptop screen away when I entered the room. "Just gallery business, Arthur. You wouldn't be interested," she'd say, a new, almost dismissive edge to her voice. And the increasingly frequent girls' weekends, to places I'd never heard her mention before, always vague on details. Each memory was a small, sharp stab of regret. Why hadn't I paid more attention? But then, another set of memories surfaced, these bringing a grim sort of reassurance. My profession had instilled in me certain habits. Years ago, after a minor data loss scare at the library involving poorly stored digital records, I'd become almost evangelical about personal data management. I had meticulously archived all our financial statements, important emails, and even scans of significant documents onto an encrypted external hard drive, stored separately, with backups in a cloud service Ellie didn't know about. It was a habit she found overly cautious, paranoid even. "No one cares about our old bank statements, Arthur," she'd sigh. At the time, I'd also quietly put the house, which I inherited from my aunt before we were married and had been mortgage-free, solely into a trust under my name when we did some estate planning updates. Ellie had been busy with a new art project and waved off the paperwork. "You handle it, darling. Legal stuff makes my head spin." It wasn't about distrust then, it was about responsible stewardship of an asset. Now it felt like a lifeline. There was also a comprehensive medical power of attorney I'd insisted we both complete a few years back after a colleague suffered a debilitating illness and his family faced legal nightmares. I'd named Sarah as my secondary agent if Ellie was unavailable or unwilling. Little acts of foresight, born from a career spent understanding the long-term implications of present actions, now loomed as my only defenses. The path ahead was terrifyingly unclear, but at least I wasn't starting completely unarmed. I was weak, my speech still sometimes slurred, my left hand clumsy, but my mind, the archivist's mind, was beginning to piece things together. Ellie and I met at a university fundraising dinner. I was there representing the library's special collections. She was a volunteer, luminous and witty, a splash of vibrant color in my muted, academic world. I was 28, already set in my quiet ways. She was 25, full of dreams of art, travel, and a life less ordinary than the one my modest salary could offer. Looking back, the cracks were there from the start, hairline fractures in the foundation of our shared life. I found solace in the quiet hum of the archives, in the tangible connection to the past. She craved excitement, novelty, the validation of an admiring audience. My idea of a perfect evening was a rare book and a glass of wine. Hers was a gallery opening or a lively dinner party. For years, we'd compromised or perhaps coexisted. I admired her passion, her ability to light up a room, even if I often felt like a spectator in her life rather than a participant. She, I think, appreciated my stability, the calm harbor I represented, even if she found it stifling at times. The money was a constant, unspoken tension. My librarian's salary was steady but unremarkable. She worked part-time at a small art gallery, her income sporadic. Her taste, however, was expensive. She loved beautiful things, art, clothes, exotic holidays we couldn't quite afford. "We need to live a little, Arthur," she'd say, a touch of desperation in her voice, especially after returning from those increasingly frequent trips with her new friends. I tried. I took on extra freelance archival projects, spent weekends cataloging private collections for a bit more income, all of which she accepted as her due. The distance grew not in angry eviducts, lutted, but in silences, in separate rooms, in dreams that no longer intersected. I think in her own way, she felt trapped, perhaps even unloved, mistaking my quiet nature for indifference. I wasn't a man of grand gestures or passionate declarations. My love was in the everyday, in the steadfast presence, in ensuring the bills were paid and the roof secure. But maybe that wasn't the language she understood. The trips with Marcus Thorne, the investment opportunities. They weren't just about money, I began to suspect. They were about a different kind of life, a life where she felt seen, admired, important. He clearly spoke her language, a dialect of promises and glamour I couldn't, or wouldn't, master. My stroke, my incapacitation, must have seemed like the perfect, unforeseen opportunity, a chance to seize not just the assets, but the life she felt she'd been denied. It was a bleak narrative, but one that resonated with the cold logic of betrayal. After a few days at Sarah's, a semblance of strength returned. My speech was clearer, the fogginess in my head lifting, though the physical therapy for my left side was grueling. Sarah was a rock, fetching groceries, making calls to my doctors, and just being there, a quiet, unwavering presence. One afternoon, a text popped up on my phone. It was from Mrs. Henderson, our elderly next-door neighbor, a kind woman who often chatted with Ellie over the fence. "Arthur, dear, hope you're feeling better. Haven't seen you around. Ellie mentioned you were on a work trip. Just a heads up, there's a rather slick-looking fellow in a fancy sports car who's been at your place quite a bit. Thought you should know." A cold knot formed in my stomach. A work trip, slick fellow, fancy sports car, Marcus Thorne. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. This wasn't just Ellie, it was a conspiracy. Sarah saw the look on my face. "What is it, Arthur?" I showed her the text. Her lips tightened. "That scum." My professional training kicked in. I needed to verify to document. "Sarah?" I said, my voice hoarse. "I need my encrypted hard drive, the one I keep in the study desk, top right drawer, and my old laptop." That evening, with Sarah looking over my shoulder, I logged into my archived financial records. Ellie, it turned out, had become an authorized user on our main joint savings account a year ago. I'd agreed, thinking it made sense for emergencies if I was traveling for a conference. I had, however, maintained separate access logs to my cloud backup of the bank's own online portal, a redundant system I'd set up an archivist's belt and suspenders approach, cross-referencing the bank's official online statements with my archived screenshots of login activity. I found a discrepancy. Large transfers, all initiated by Ellie, began right after Marcus Thorne entered her life, small at first, then larger, culminating in the complete drain while I was in the ICU. But there was something else, something I hadn't noticed before in my meticulous digital hoarding. Ellie had opened a new email account a few months ago, one I didn't know about. How did I know? Because a notification for that new account had once accidentally been forwarded to our shared family email, an email I had, out of habit, archived. The subject line was innocuous, "Your new account setup," but the sender was a different email provider. It was a tiny thread, one I hadn't pulled on before. Now it felt like a lifeline to a hidden world. This was no longer just about marital betrayal, it felt like a coordinated financial attack. The target wasn't just our shared assets, it was my entire financial stability, orchestrated while I was at my most vulnerable. My initial despair began to curdle into a cold, focused anger. I needed professional help, and I needed it fast. The next morning, Sarah drove me to Vivian Holloway's office. Vivian was a referral from a former colleague at the library whose department had once used her for a complex copyright dispute. She was sharp, no nonsense, with eyes that seemed to see right through you. I laid out what I knew: the hospital stay, the emptied accounts, the text from Ellie, Mrs. Henderson's message, and my discovery of the frequent transfers and the new email account. I showed her my archived financial records and the login discrepancies. She listened intently, occasionally asking a precise, probing question. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair. Mr. Finch, this is more than just an ugly divorce. The timing of these withdrawals while you were verifiably incapacitated could constitute financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, especially since a significant portion of these funds originated from your sole inheritance and long-term earnings, which you can document. Music to my ears. The house being in a trust solely in your name and you being the primary resident gives you a very strong position there, especially if we can demonstrate her intent to defraud you and abandon the marital home with joint assets. Vivian outlined a strategy first, an immediate legal notice to Ellie and the bank demanding a freeze on any further movement of the funds and their full return. Second, we would file for an emergency hearing. We need to gather more evidence on this Marcus Thorne character and his involvement, Vivian said. Your wife's actions, coupled with a potential accomplice, paint a picture of premeditated deceit. That new email account she set up could be a treasure trove, but accessing it legally is tricky. She then asked about any other preemptive measures. I told her about my meticulous digital archiving, how I saved copies of almost all digital communications and financial transactions, stored independently of our shared computer. A librarian's obsession. I called it, half apologetically. Vivian's eyes lit up. Mr. Finch, that obsession might just be your trump card. If Ellie and this Thorne character communicated via email or messaging apps, and if any of those communications passed through devices or accounts you have legitimate, sole access to, or if they left digital footprints on shared devices prior to your incapacitation, those could be admissible. She suggested contacting a digital forensics expert she often worked with, someone who specialized in ethically and legally recovering data from personal devices. But first, she wanted to see what my archive held. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a flicker of hope. I wasn't just a victim. I had tools, I had a plan, and I had a formidable ally. The fight was just beginning, but at least now I felt like I was on solid ground, armed with the power of systematically preserved truth. Back at Sarah's, I delved into my digital archives with a renewed sense of purpose, Vivian's words echoing in my mind. My system was old-fashioned but thorough, dated folders, meticulous file names, cross-references. I'd always believed that the context of information was as important as the information itself. As I sifted through terabytes of backed-up data from our old shared desktop computer, which Ellie had long abandoned for her sleek new laptop, I found a treasure trove. Cached files, old browser histories Ellie had likely forgotten to erase before she stopped using that machine. Even remnants of deleted instant message chats. It appeared she hadn't been as tech-savvy as she thought, or perhaps she underestimated my digital diligence. The breakthrough came from a series of recovered chat logs between Ellie and an account I didn't recognize, but the conversation patterns, the shared private jokes, and references to art deals quickly identified her correspondent as Marcus Thorne. They discussed our future, the dead weight holding you back, clearly Meath, and, most damningly, specific plans to liberate funds from Arthur's old-fashioned savings. There were messages from Thorne coaching Ellie on how to gain access to different accounts, what to say if questioned, and even suggestions on how to encourage Arthur to simplify things by making accounts joint for ease of management. This went back nearly a year. The premeditation was chilling, but the real king hit, as Vivian would later call it, was a series of emails. While searching my archive of our old shared email account for the notification about Ellie's secret new email, I found a few accidentally synced draft emails from her new account. She must have started composing them on the shared desktop before logging out, and the email client had auto-saved them locally. These drafts were to Thorne. One, dated just a week before my stroke, read, Marcus, darling, Arthur's been complaining about chest pains again. He's so stubborn, won't see a doctor. What if something happens? It would make moving the Freedom Fund so much simpler. Less complicated than the divorce route you mapped out. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just opportunism, this was ghoulish, predatory. Thorne's replies, also saved in draft or recovered from cache, were equally chilling, full of pseudo-sympathy and practical advice on asset liquidation. He even mentioned creating a cover story involving my emotional distance to justify her actions if things got messy. I meticulously documented everything, taking screenshots, noting file paths and timestamps, creating a detailed inventory, just as I would for a new archival collection. When I presented this to Vivian the next day, her eyes widened. Arthur, she said, her voice unusually somber, this is beyond standard marital fraud. This is a meticulously planned financial assault, bordering on conspiracy. With this, we don't just ask for your money back, we go for everything they touched and more. And we may have grounds for reporting Thorne to professional bodies, if he even belongs to any, or even criminal charges for elder abuse or exploitation, given your medical state. The anger I felt was pure, undiluted, but it was now a focused beam, not a wildfire. Vivian's strategy shifted. Instead of directly confronting Ellie with our findings immediately, which might make her and Thorne bolt, we would create a situation where their own greed and panic would lead them to expose themselves further. They think you're still weak recovering, perhaps unaware of the full extent of their actions. Vivian explained. Let's use that. Our first move was a carefully worded letter from Vivian to Ellie's presumed dollars but not yet officially engaged lawyer, copying Ellie directly. It was intentionally vague, stating my awareness of certain financial irregularities during my incapacitation and requesting an amicable discussion to resolve them. No mention of Thorne, no specifics, just enough to sow unease. We then filed an ex parte motion with the court to temporarily freeze only a small, specific account that Ellie had recently opened and transferred some initial funds into an account my archival research had flagged. This was a deliberate test fire, small enough not to cause widespread panic but to signal we were looking. The effect was immediate. Ellie called me, a barrage of frantic voicemails. Arthur, what is this lawyer's letter? Why are you doing this? We need to talk. This is a misunderstanding. I didn't answer, following Vivian's strict instructions. My silence, she predicted, would amplify their anxiety. The next few days, according to Sarah, who did some discreet observation of my house, were telling. Marcus Thorne's fancy sports car was a fixture in the driveway. Lights were on late. There seemed to be a lot of agitated comings and goings. Then Vivian got a call from a high-powered, aggressive divorce attorney, Olivia Wexler, announcing she now represented Ellie Finch. Wexler came out swinging, accusing me of spousal abandonment and financial intimidation. Perfect. Vivian smirked when she relayed the call. They've lawyered up with a bulldog. It means they're worried, and they're going to make mistakes. Our next step was more subtle, using the information from my recovered chat logs about their preferred discreet cafes for meetings. Vivian hired a licensed private investigator strictly for publicly observable activities. The PI's instructions were simple: document any meetings between Ellie and Thorne, focusing on any visible exchange of documents or items. Within a week, the PI delivered photos of Ellie handing Thorne a large manila envelope in the parking lot of one of their usual spots. It wasn't conclusive of wrongdoing in itself, but it established their ongoing association and the exchange of something tangible, contradicting Ellie's likely future claims they were barely acquainted. The masterstroke, however, was playing on their likely assumption that most of the stolen money was now safely hidden. Vivian, through Olivia Wexler, proposed a ridiculously low settlement offer on my behalf, due to my ongoing health concerns and desire to avoid further stress. It was designed to make them think I was desperate and uninformed. Wexler, smelling blood, advised Ellie to reject it and counter with demands for alimony and half the house value, claiming Ellie's contributions to its upkeep and emotional support. This was exactly what Vivian hoped for. Their greed was making them overplay their hand. By demanding part of the house A, which was solely in my trust, they opened the door for us to introduce evidence of her fraudulent behavior as a reason why she was entitled to nothing. The trap wasn't a trap, it was a carefully constructed stage upon which they would perform their own downfall. The emergency hearing convened by Judge Alastair Hayes was initially just about the funds Ellie had moved post-stroke. Olivia Wexler, Ellie's attorney, was all polished aggression, painting me as a neglectful husband who had driven Ellie to secure her own future. Ellie, seated beside her, looked pale but defiant, occasionally dabbing her eyes. I sat with Vivian, trying to keep my expression neutral, my recovered chat logs and email drafts feeling like a physical weight in my briefcase. Wexler argued that since it was a joint account, Ellie had every right to the funds. She then tried to pivot, bringing up my sudden and unexplained abandonment of the marital home post-hospitalization. Judge Hayes, an experienced jurist with a reputation for a low tolerance for theatrics, listened patiently. Then Vivian rose. Your Honor, Mr. Finch did not abandon the home. He was recovering from a life-threatening stroke, during which time, as evidenced by these bank statements, Mrs. Finch systematically emptied their joint accounts. We contend this was not about securing her future, but about financial exploitation during his incapacitation, orchestrated with a third party, Mr. Marcus Thorne. Vivian then presented the initial bank records of the withdrawals. Wexler scoffed. Circumstantial, Your Honor. And Mr. Thorne is a respected financial advisor who was merely assisting Mrs. Finch. That was the moment. Vivian paused, then said, In that case, Your Honor, we would like to present communications between Mrs. Finch and Mr. Thorne, recovered from Mr. Finch's personal, archived digital records, communications that began almost a year prior to his stroke. These communications discuss, in detail, plans to access Mr. Finch's assets, disparage his character, and even speculate callously on the financial simplification his potential demise might offer. Vivian placed the bound copies of the emails and chat logs on the judge's bench. Wexler objected furiously. Inadmissible. Invasion of privacy. But Vivian Cooley cited case law regarding evidence of fraud and the spousal crime fraud exception to marital privilege, especially concerning communication stored on shared devices prior to clear marital breakdown or on devices exclusively owned by the victim. Judge Hayes peered at the documents over his glasses. The courtroom was silent. He read for what felt like an eternity. As he read, I watched Ellie. Her defiant mask crumbled. Her face went ashen. Thorne's name, their private conversations, their ugly plans laid bare. She began to tremble, whispering frantically to Wexler, who was now looking less confident. Judge Hayes finally looked up, his gaze stern, fixed on Ellie. "Mrs. Finch," he said, his voice quiet but carrying immense authority. "These communications paint a deeply disturbing picture. Coupled with the timing of the financial transactions during your husband's severe illness, this suggests a calculated, predatory course of action. I am ordering an immediate, full freeze on all known assets of both yourself and Mr. Marcus Thorne pending a thorough investigation. Furthermore, I am granting Mr. Finch temporary exclusive possession of the marital home." Wexler started to protest, but the judge cut her off with a sharp rap of his gavel. "Counselor, I suggest you advise your client that her next statements should be to investigators, not in this courtroom, unless she wishes to incriminate herself further." The air crackled with a tension so thick I could barely breathe. It wasn't just a legal victory, it was the raw, unadulterated exposure of a monstrous betrayal witnessed by the dispassionate eyes of justice. Ellie looked at me then, her eyes wide with a terror that was, for the first time, not feigned. The judge's ruling was a sledgehammer blow to Ellie and Thorne. With their assets frozen and the damning evidence of their premeditated scheme now part of the court record, their fight crumbled. Olivia Wexler, likely realizing the reputational damage of representing such a flagrantly deceitful client, advised Ellie to settle, and quickly. Thorne, I later learned, tried to flee the state but was apprehended due to an alert Vivian had proactively filed with law enforcement based on his known assets and the frozen accounts. He faced separate charges for fraud and financial exploitation, a mess entirely of his own making. The divorce was finalized with surprising speed. In the settlement, I received 100% of the house, as it was always my separate property held in trust, my full pension and retirement accounts, which Ellie had tried to claim a share of, and the return of 90% of the money she had illicitly transferred from our joint accounts. The remaining 10% was more than covered by her share of what little was left in any truly marital assets after her legal fees were deducted. She was also ordered to pay a significant portion of my legal costs. The meticulously archived emails and chats were the undisputed linchpins of my case. Ellie walked away with her personal belongings, her rapidly diminishing reputation, and the consequences of her choices. I never spoke to her directly again after that courtroom confrontation. All communication was through our lawyers. There were no apologies, no explanations, just the cold finality of signatures on legal documents. The weight that lifted from my shoulders was immense. It wasn't about the money, not really. It was about reclaiming my life, my dignity, and proving that truth, even when buried under layers of deceit, could be methodically unearthed and brought to light, much like a lost historical record. My archivist's precision, once a subject of Ellie's gentle mockery, had become my sword and shield. With the legal battles over, the silence in my house was profound. It was no longer our house, it was mine, but it echoed with too many ghosts, too many bitter memories. Every room held a reminder of Ellie, of the life we'd shared and the betrayal that had shattered it. Sarah helped me pack. We went through 15 years of accumulated belongings, sorting, discarding, archiving what mattered. It was a painful but necessary exorcism. 6 months later, I sold the house. I bought a smaller, more manageable condo in a different part of the city, closer to Sarah and her family, and nearer to the library. The new space was clean, minimalist, a blank slate. I filled it not with the past, but with things that brought me quiet joy: books, of course, a comfortable reading chair, a small balcony where I could grow herbs. My recovery from the stroke was ongoing. I still had some lingering weakness on my left side, a slight tremor in my hand, but I was regaining strength daily. I couldn't immediately return to the physically demanding aspects of archival work, the lifting of heavy boxes and intricate handling of fragile items. So, I took a temporary role within the library system, helping to design and implement a new city-wide digital archiving protocol, something I could do from a desk, leveraging my organizational skills and foresight. It was different, less hands-on with history, but it was engaging, forward-looking. I started volunteering at a local community center, teaching basic computer literacy and digital safety to seniors, showing them how to protect themselves online, a quiet nod to my own recent ordeal. I found a surprising satisfaction in it. Life settled into a new rhythm, quieter than before, more solitary, but not lonely. There was a peace in the simplicity, a strength in the self-reliance I was rediscovering. The betrayal had carved something out of me, but it had also revealed a resilience I hadn't known I possessed. One afternoon, sorting through the last few boxes from the old house, I found our wedding album. My first instinct was to throw it in the trash, to eradicate that chapter completely. But I paused. Arthur Finch, archivist, a keeper of records, good and bad. This too was part of my story, a significant, albeit painful, entry in the catalog of my life. I didn't open it. I simply placed it on a high shelf in the back of a closet, a historical artifact, acknowledged but no longer emotionally charged. Not long after, Vivian Holloway called. Marcus Thorne had been convicted on multiple counts of fraud and exploitation, largely thanks to the detailed evidence trail I had preserved. Several other victims had come forward after his arrest, their stories eerily similar to mine. My meticulous record-keeping hadn't just saved me, it had helped bring a predator to justice and potentially saved others from his schemes. Sarah's eldest daughter, Amelia, who'd been fascinated by my ordeal and Vivian's deft legal work, announced she was switching her major to pre-law with a focus on elder law and financial ethics. I used a small portion of the recovered funds to set up a modest education trust for her. That, more than any court judgment, felt like a true victory, a way to spin straw into gold. The stroke had been a brutal awakening, Ellie's betrayal a devastating blow. But in the ruins, I'd found an unexpected strength. I learned that trust, once shattered, is rarely pieced back together in the same way. But that new foundations, built on caution and self-awareness, can be even stronger. Some betrayals don't break you, they remake you. They strip you down to the essentials and force you to decide what truly matters. For me, it was quiet integrity, the enduring value of truth, and the unexpected resilience of a librarian who knew how to read the fine print of his own life. The archives I tended now included my own, a testament to survival, and a quiet promise of a future authored solely by me.